Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Can everybody hear me in the back? Good? Okay. My name is Joe Harvey. I'm a captain with the Golden Police Department. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I know you have a lot of things you could be doing. I certainly wish tonight's presentation was on a more positive topic. Unfortunately, tonight we're here for a very serious topic, and that is to inform you about a sexually violent predator that has moved into our community. Fortunately for the City of Golden, this is a rare occurrence, but that does not relieve any of the tension and or fears that each of you may be feeling in regards to this specific situation. And so what we want to try to do tonight is provide you with information, because information can be very powerful. I do not believe that our efforts tonight are going to eliminate the fears or concerns that you may have. What we do hope to achieve is that in some small way, we're able to mitigate some of those concerns by providing you all of the details that we can share, all of the steps that the involved agencies are going to be taking to monitor this situation, and so that you can at least leave here tonight feeling like this situation is at least in hand with the local authorities, and they are doing everything within their power to make sure that the situation is monitored. So tonight we have gathered a group of experts to my right and to my left that we're going to be sharing a lot of this information, and we've got a PowerPoint, and the information has been split up so that the experts will talk about the slides that we think are appropriate. And during this process, you may come up with questions that you have. What I would ask you to do is hold off until this presentation is going to take about 45 minutes. I would ask that you hold off on writing down your question until you get about 30 minutes through the presentation. Because this is not the first type of presentation that on this type of event. So we have taken a lot of the questions we've gotten from other community meetings, and we've tried to answer those in our presentation. But we won't be able to get through all of those in the presentation that we're giving, and you may have an individual question. So we want you to write those questions down. We had cards and pencils outside. If you didn't get a card or a pencil and you think you might have a question, just quietly now would be the time to grab one of those and have it available. Okay? What I'd like to do next is move over to Detective Barron, and we're going to introduce the panel.
My name is Jim Barron. I'm a detective with the Golden Police Department. I'm the person responsible for registration and monitoring of the sex offenders in Golden, in addition to other general investigative tasks that I'm assigned.
My name is Diana Allen. I work for RSA, and that is a treatment program that treats sex offenders.
My name is Megan Clark. Chris Charlin was up on the board, but she's actually over there on the wall. She's a colleague of mine. And I am a victim advocate with Victim Outreach Incorporated. We are the victim service providers for Golden Police Department.
Good evening. My name is Christian Gardner-Wood. I'm a deputy district attorney here in the 1st Judicial District. I'm in our special victims unit, so I handle sex offenses and crimes against children for our judicial district. I'm also a member of several subcommittees of the Sex Offender Management Board for the state, including the Sexually Violent Predator Subcommittee for the state Sex Offender Management Board.
My name is Marissa Robertson, and I'm a parole officer with the state of Colorado. I'm based out of the Westminster office, which is, we supervise Golden out of our office. And so I'll be answering the supervision questions on things of what's going on with our gentleman.
So we want to go through a couple of basic ground rules for how this presentation is going to work. This is important that we try to keep emotions down as much as we possibly can. So we want to provide the opportunity for you to write those questions down, but we want those questions passed off to a police officer. We'll get them up to Chris and I. So if you've written a question down, and you believe you want that question answered, just raise your hand, and one of the officers will see you. They'll come down and get the card and bring it up to us, okay? We ask that, I don't see any kids, but we ask that only adults write those questions down. Now, this is an important announcement. Some of you in the audience may have been a victim of a traumatic event like what we're going to be talking about. And these types of presentations can create a trigger for you emotionally, and we want you to make sure that you're taken care of first. So we have victim advocates that are just outside the main doors in the vestibule. So anytime during this presentation you're feeling like you really need to step out and talk to somebody, we'll have some folks out back for you to meet with, okay? The only thing we ask is that during this question and answer period, this is not the time for us to share stories, because many times those can just create and enhance fear. And we're here today to try to provide you information to mitigate those. So we want the questions to be clearly written on the card, pertinent to the situation that we're faced with today, so that we can answer as many of those questions as we can. Now we're going to have about a 45-minute presentation, and then we want to leave about 30 to 45 minutes for questions. So we will get to as many questions as we can, but we will conclude promptly at 8 o'clock. We will have people outside of the school. If you have additional questions or you don't want yours asked up front, but you want to meet with one of the folks for a few minutes afterwards, we'll be outside and you can come up and talk to us.
After this presentation, there'll be information available to you on the City of Golden website that will include information about this person, the address, some additional educational information that you may find helpful. That's the address up there for our website, and that'll be available to you in handout form at the end of this. Yeah, sorry. Take a quick look at this group of people. You don't have to make any response now. Just kind of take a look at them. These community notifications are mandated by law, and the team that generally gives these include people from law enforcement, the district attorney, probation officers, sex offender treatment providers, victim advocates, and guests, and we have several of those in our audience now. Those include Chief Greg Boland from the Colorado School of Mines Police. I'm sorry? Is that better? We have Chief Greg Boland from the Colorado School of Mines Police, Chief Bill Kilpatrick from the Golden Police Department, Commander Dave Sellison from the School of Mines Police. In addition, we have Detective Kelly Shearer from the Arvada Police Department. This person registered and had this same event occur on June 13th of this year. And Detective Shearer had to organize that and is familiar with this person and his case. From R1, Jeffco R1 Security, Mary Ann Parrott is here, from VOI, Nicole and Chris, in addition to Megan. They'll be available outside at the table to answer questions as well. Gary Fear is here from the Department of Parole. He is one of the managers, as is Jeff Geist, both from the Department of Parole, and Heather Hardgrove, a parole officer, here as well. So people that can answer questions you have about it. The presentation will include several items intended to benefit your knowledge of what sex offenders' legislative history is, how we monitor them, how we notify the community, and we will then give you the subject of this community notification and address some community and safety issues, as well as answering your questions at the end of the presentation.
So with that, we wanted to give you some background on why we're here. This started back in the early to mid 1990s with a string of federal legislation around sex offense laws, sex offense registration, and sex offense community notification. I won't go into specific detail around all of these federal statutes, but suffice it to say, they all started based on some pretty heinous acts that happened across the country. And there was a large federal response in the 90s to inform communities and allow communities to protect themselves with information about offenders and about their community. The idea is to have sex offenders in our community that meet certain standards to register. On top of that, there was federal statutes that then mandated active community notification, such as what we're doing tonight for the highest risk sex offenders in our community. And then that also included, importantly for Golden and the School of Mines being in Golden, the Campus Prevention Act, in terms of information about what is happening on campus and who offenders may be on campus, in conjunction with our municipalities and specifically the city of Golden here. That takes us then to the state laws that require that our notification and our presence today. That starts with the sexually violent predator definition. I'm going to spend a little bit of time explaining to you what qualifies somebody to be a sexually violent predator in the state of Colorado, and that's based on this statute that's cited on here for you. In conjunction with that, there's a requirement when somebody meets the definition of a sexually violent predator that community notification take place by the jurisdiction where that offender is living. And in the city of Golden, that's determined to be a community meeting like this, where mailings were sent out to individuals within a certain radius of the house where this individual is now a registered sex offender. And then the last statute, excuse me, is the Sex Offender Registration Act for the state of Colorado. Generally, somebody that meets the sex offender registration requirements registers once a year. If somebody is a sexually violent predator, they not only have to register and have community notification like this, but they also are registering 4 times a year. They're registering quarterly because of additional concerns for somebody that meets the definition of a sexually violent predator. So that takes us then to essentially what I was talking to. Sex offender registration is generally considered to be passive notification to the community. Community members can go to a website or can go to their local law enforcement agency to get information about sex offenders registered in their community. And that's passive notification in the state of Colorado. Anybody that meets the definition of a sexually violent predator, we're required to do active notification to the community. That can be done in one of 2 ways. Places such as the city of Denver do that through public television. It's a little bit more passive than most of the jurisdictions in Jefferson County do, including the city of Golden. In the city of Golden and the city of Arvada, it's determined that we send mailers out and that we have this opportunity for questions and answers and have this community notification meeting in conjunction with this presentation then being on public television after today's date. So in terms of what it means for somebody to be a sexually violent predator, this is based on an assessment that somebody needs to do. And as you see, essentially what that means is somebody that is more likely to commit a new sex offense or a new violent offense after having been convicted or adjudicated as a sex offender. Sometimes sexually violent predator is a misnomer. Essentially what it means is a high-risk sex offender. Generally, and don't hold me to these statistics, but generally it's about 5% of sex offenders in the state of Colorado will meet the definition of a sexually violent predator, meaning they are at high risk to reoffend, either criminally in terms of some violent offense or reoffend as a sex offender. As you will hear in this case, although sexually violent predator generally can be classified as a high-risk sex offender, there are some indications of some violence in this offense. And that's why we're doing this notification. We want you to be able to have information so that you can decide what is best to protect yourselves and your family. Offenders are determined to be sexually violent predators based on a state-mandated assessment. That assessment is done through an organization called the Sex Offender Management Board in the state of Colorado. I had indicated I work with that group and several subcommittees of that group that provide statewide guidance around sex offenders generally, and also have developed the risk assessment tool to classify somebody as a sexually violent predator. There's also a way that if somebody is a sexually violent predator in another state and moves here, that also will classify them as a sexually violent predator. In our case tonight, we're talking about somebody that was in Colorado, committed their offense in Colorado, and met the Colorado assessment tool that classified him as a sexually violent predator. There's 4 requirements to start with before somebody even meets the eligibility to be assessed as a sexually violent predator. And if they meet these 4 requirements, then there is a risk assessment tool that is based on an evidence-based assessment around what makes somebody high risk and what makes somebody likely to reoffend as either criminal or sex offense. First is age. Age is somebody has to be over the age of 18 or tried as an adult for their sex offense in order to even meet the ability to be classified as a sex offender. Beyond that, they have to have had an offense subsequent to 1997 and 1999 in order to be eligible to be classified as a sexually violent predator. Those are relatively pro forma type of requirements. And then we get into certain types of sex offenses before somebody can be assessed as a sexually violent predator. You see those on the screen. That is somebody that has committed sexual assault, somebody that has committed unlawful sexual contact with another individual, or somebody that has engaged in sexual assault on a child. We'll talk in a minute about the individual and the offense that he committed. I will also talk to you about what sexual assault means for purposes of screening somebody to be a sexually violent predator in the state of Colorado. But what we're looking at in this case is not an offense against a child. I will tell you that up front. We're looking at an adult sex assault that we are dealing with. So somebody needs to be convicted of one of those crimes, and then they can be assessed as a sexually violent predator. Next, somebody has to meet what's called the relationship criteria. There's 3 ways to meet the relationship criteria. Either 1, they are a stranger to their victim, the person that sexually assaulted somebody else. That person they sexually assaulted was a stranger to them. The next is they promoted a relationship. Promotion means that they started the relationship or created the relationship essentially for the sole purpose of sexually victimizing somebody else. And then the third is established. I misspoke. Established is creating the relationship solely for the purposes of sexual victimization. Promotion of a relationship is having a preset relationship that you then purposefully change the nature of that relationship to be one of purely sexual victimization. So somebody has to meet one of those 3 criteria in this relationship context in order to be classified as a sexually violent predator and meet the assessment requirement that Diana's going to talk to you about as the final step for somebody to be a sexually violent predator.
So once all of these criteria are met, the SVP assessment then is triggered. It is typically triggered by the probation officer at the time that the offender is being sentenced. However, DOC can also do the assessment as well. The assessment tool will be changing in January, but it won't affect the notification process. But as it stands right now, the risk assessment, the offender has to meet the prior felony conviction or have 2 misdemeanor offenses. It's comprised of actuarial risk assessments, age, stability of functioning, education, prior supervision. There is a component in there for mental abnormality. If the person meets criteria for psychopathy or antisocial personality disorders, That's a component that is also assessed.
If this offender meets the criteria you've heard here, then the probation officers and the Department of Corrections recommends that the court make a finding that the defendant be designated as an SVP. That has to be done by the court. In addition, if SVP status or its equivalent is designated by another state or jurisdiction, then that individual's SVP status transfers to Colorado as well. All people designated as SVPs are subject to community notification meetings, which is what you're at tonight. Community notification is mandated by several measures here. One, the Department of Parole and the Probation Department notifies local law enforcement, in this case the City of Golden, that an SVP has arrived in this community. I was also notified by Detective Shearer from Arvada that he was coming, so we had a little bit of warning. He must register as soon as he gets to the new residence, and he did register within 3 days of moving here. We also did verification of his residence and his address the next day on Thanksgiving. The law enforcement, our department has to notify CBI that he's living in Golden, and they place information about him on their website within 3 days, and that's been on there for a while. Some of you may have found that information. And then with the police department and law enforcement conducts a community notification in accordance with criteria established by the Sex Offender Management Board. I asked you a minute ago to take a look at these people and decide if you thought there was anything in common. They're all sex offenders, and some of them are felony sex offenders, and some of them are SVPs. The idea behind this is you can't tell by looking who they are or what they've done. Some people you wouldn't expect at all in this, so that's important for you to understand. There are some facts to know about sex offenders in the state of Colorado. As of November 22nd, when we last checked this information with CBI, there were 18,873 registered sex offenders in Colorado. About 10,000 of those were convicted of felony offenses. As of that date, there were 44 registered sex offenders in Golden, and there are 203 SVPs designated in the state of Colorado, and about half of those people are still in jail. So it's a relatively rare occurrence that these people are designated that and moved to these communities.
So we included some slides in this presentation about myth versus fact, which is important because I think people have a lot of misconceptions about sexual assault and what that looks like. And so the first slide here that we have is that the majority of offenders are in prison when, in fact, most sex assaults go unreported, so nobody is ever held accountable for those. Goes across the second point there, and then that sex crimes are not prevalent. The stat up on the screen there, it says 1999, but I verified that it is actually correct as of 2010 as well, that 1 in 4 women and 1 in 17 men will be sexually assaulted in their lifetime. Oh, my list is different. So another myth is that you can spot a sex offender, and I think as Detective Barron pointed out with the slideshow of the pictures, just by looking at somebody, you really can't tell if they are a sex offender or not. Most offenders have a long rap sheet. That goes back to the fact that most sex assaults are not reported, so most of these people have no rap sheet and no criminal record at all. Sex crimes are acts of impulse. Studies have shown that 75% of sex offenses are carefully planned. And when they involve 3 or more assailants, the number climbs to 90%.
Sex offender characteristics. So there is no one characteristic that will identify a sex offender. It ranges from school teachers to grandfathers to uncles to mothers to aunts. So there's no one characteristic that will identify a sex offender. Some sex offenders engage in crossover behaviors. And what crossover behaviors is that they may engage in different types of sexual offenses. So one offender may have been caught for a rape, but then he has also engaged in exposing himself on numerous occasions. That would be a crossover behavior. So crime of conviction is only one indicator of risk. Child molesters in Colorado who reoffended sexually did not live closer to schools, daycare centers than those who did not reoffend. Most sex offenders are male. However, there are female sex offenders as well. Female sex offenders account for less than 10% of all sex offenses.
Okay. So on this slide, we have that sex assaults occur in dangerous places. The fact of the matter is that most sex assaults occur in either the victim's home or the offender's home. Most sex crimes are committed by a stranger. Now, this stat is for child sex abuse victims, but we also know this stat to be true for adult victims as well. Most people know their offender.
So we've talked repeatedly tonight about sexual assault. A lot of people use the term of rape. That term does not exist in Colorado statute, but essentially when people think of a rape type of offense, essentially it is a sex assault as defined on the slide in front of you. That is, engaging in sexual intrusion or penetration of another person without their consent and doing so in a way that is calculated to overcome their will, either physically or mentally overcoming somebody's will. That's one way to commit a sex assault. If we look at the next slide, the other sort of two main ways that we see sex offenses, I shouldn't say sex offense, a sex assault as it is defined in statute committed in the state of Colorado, it's usually alcohol or drug facilitated sexual assault. And that is by engaging in a sexual intrusion or penetration against somebody who is incapable of appraising the nature of the situation. And that's largely due to alcohol or drug consumption. That is, somebody that's intoxicated, they cannot apprise the physical and mental and emotional situation that they are a part of, and somebody inflicts a sex assault upon them. In conjunction with that, there's another charge of sexual assault against somebody who is physically helpless. That is usually somebody that is sleeping or somebody that is physically disabled and physically helpless from being able to protect themselves from the sex offender that is engaging in the sexual contact with them. So when we talk about sex assault in the state of Colorado, those are sort of the three key ways that we see a sex assault committed on an adult victim in the state of Colorado. And we're focused on that because that's essentially the crimes in which we're talking about with the individual who's subject to tonight's community notification.
Okay, as far as community supervision, you guys have heard the terms probation and parole thrown out there. Just to kind of give a clarification to help understand what the difference is. Probation have not gone to prison, usually, and when they're on parole, they've been in prison. So it's just kind of the easy way to kind of think of it. This gentleman has been in prison and is currently released and is on parole. As the slide says, behaviors are choices. Just like anyone makes a choice every day, people do make bad choices and can learn to make new choices and new skills and hopefully not commit new crimes. Not all sex offenders in Colorado are supervised as sex offenders on parole. Some are on probation, some have never been caught. So there's that. Part of a parole officer's job in monitoring sex offenders is we make sure they're employed, we talk to the therapists, we make sure they're going to treatment, we do drugs and alcohol, we know where their whereabouts are, we provide earn time, we provide sanctions. That kind of means if they get in trouble or say they forget a UA, we'll take away earn time from them or other possible sanction of going to jail for a little bit. Or if the severity of the offense, they could end up going back to prison for it. As being a sex offender on parole, there is no privacy. They are required and must tell and talk about everything with their therapist, their parole officers, any support members they have in their lives that are involved in the situation. There should be no secrets. Usually the secrets, if they are keeping a secret, the secrets are found out. We require complete transparency from our offenders on parole, and it's constantly talked about between the staff or the containment model, so that way we can make sure that we know what's going on. If there's secrets, there tend to be public safety issues, and that's not tolerated by parole. And so there's those. So the one model we look at is, if you guys see the team model, that includes the parole officer, the supervising therapist. We do monthly staffings. We do daily staffings if needed. We email constantly. We talk back and forth. When they have a polygraph, the parole officer and the therapist provide input on what should be asked on the polygraph. And we all kind of collaborate together. And everything we do with the sex offender is a collaborative effort. So it's not just one person always paying attention to what's going on. There's always several eyes that somebody may see something that somebody else doesn't. Oh. Is that the same?
That's the same
Same
side, I'm sorry.
Okay.
So a couple more myths for you. I think in society we hear this one a lot. The victim asked for it, or she was doing something, engaging in something that said she was wanting this, when the fact is that sex offenders use power and control and manipulation to overcome their victim's will. Victims who have no serious injuries or obvious injuries are not traumatized. That's also a myth. Only about 4% of sex assault victims reported serious injuries, and 70% reported no physical injuries at all. It's important to note that it is the emotional and mental injuries that are the most severe for these victims. So the impact on victims of sex offenses, as this slide shows, that victims may have a lot of different reactions, and what we say in our line of work all the time is any reaction is a normal reaction. You could have a victim who is in the hospital having her SANE exam done and she is laughing and cracking jokes, or you might have a victim who's crying hysterically. All of those are acceptable, all of those are normal. PTSD for victims is a very common occurrence and a long-lasting effect that they have to deal with for the rest of their lives. Short-term flashbacks, nightmares, loss of appetite are all common as well. So suffering from depression is also something that we see in our victims. Suicidal ideation, and they are certainly at a higher risk for developing a substance abuse problem. Responses are minimized when victims are believed and supported.
So the community has a vested interest in helping these offenders successfully be managed in their community. Harassment of these people is counterproductive. to the goals of community management and can, more importantly, cause the offender to go underground where we can't monitor him or manage him. Sex offenders have the same need for housing and employment as the rest of us, and they have the same protections under law. The important thing to understand is that a stable sex offender equals an increased community safety. And any citizen who uses the information we're about to give you to harass, threaten, or intimidate will be committing a crime. And we don't want to see that happen. This section will introduce the offender to you. His name is Wayne Joseph Ivano. He lives at 517 Maple Street. Date of birth 9/15/1976. He's 41 years old, 6'1", 190 pounds, brown hair and hazel eyes. And this is how he appeared when he registered with me the day before Thanksgiving. People can change their appearances and look markedly different, and it's important to understand that, and it's important for us to know about that. These are other pictures of Wayne Ivano as he's appeared at various other times. So you can see that the pictures can tell you that these people change their appearance. They are required, if they change their appearance, to let me know and come in and re-register so that I can take additional photographs. And that's what we hope they do. Wayne Ivano is an SVP because, and we went through the criteria earlier, and we'll talk about those now. He has to have been at least 18 years of age. He was 39 at the time of this offense. The crime must have been committed on or after July 1st, 1997, the conviction after July 1st, 1999. His offense was on January 10th, 2015. It occurred in the city of Golden. The conviction was for attempted sexual assault, overcoming the victim's will. Another word for that would be attempted rape. He had previous convictions for sex offenses in Arizona. Those included indecent exposure and public indecency. This victim was a stranger to him. He was evaluated according to the process you were informed of today and found by the court to have positive results, and he was ruled to be identified as a sexually violent predator. That occurs when he enters prison. He was subsequently released from the Department of Corrections and is on parole, as you understand. And I'm sorry that I'm interfering with Marissa's presentation to you because she'll tell you exactly how he's being monitored.
You can do it. So, Mr. Ivano, he paroled on May 25th of this year. His current discharge date is he's received a 2-year parole sentence. So he served his prison time, and now he will, in the state of Colorado, we have a prison sentence and then a parole sentence that follows, the mandatory parole period. So he's completed his prison time, and now he's working on his parole time, and that will end in the end of 2018 or the beginning of 2019. I am not Mr. Ivano's parole officer, but I do see Mr. Ivano all the time. My partner is his parole officer, and so I see him all the time, we talk to him all the time, and I talk to the officer about him all the time. Mr. Ivano is currently on a GPS bracelet. I'm not gonna go into a lot of detail because I could spend hours trying to explain to you all the stuff the GPS unit can do, and it would confuse everybody. But Mr. Ivano is on a GPS. We can tell where he's at, the locations. We can block locations that if he goes, for example, if he's not allowed to be in a park, an alert will go off and we'll get notified immediately that he's in the park, and then we can contact him and find out what's going on, or send somebody there immediately if we need to. Along with the GPS unit, we know his whereabouts the whole time. He will be on the GPS unit until the day he discharges his parole. The GPS units are ankle monitors, just little bracelets, but they have lots of sensors in them. So if he cuts it off or he tampers with it in any way, an alert is sent immediately, and parole officers are notified immediately. We can also notify Golden Police Department immediately. Depending on who can get there the quickest and the fastest to respond, we will get them there. So there's that to know. He has to charge it. If the battery starts to get to low on the GPS, we have parole officers on call that will call him and get a hold of him and ask what's going on. We'll make sure he gets a charger, because maybe there's a malfunction in the unit, or his bracelet broke, or he lost the charger. So we want to make sure that he can take care of that and manage that and do what he needs to do so we don't lose him somewhere. Mr. Ivano is currently in therapy at RSA. Per Mr. Ivano's request, he has doubled up on his treatment, and he is going twice a week and doing double as much as everybody else to try to complete his therapy prior to discharging parole. As far as the parole officers are involved, we do home visits on Mr. Ivano. He's required to come to the office. We do checks with him at therapy. We see him quite often. Is kind of what it boils down to. Mr. Ivano is allowed to have a smartphone. Along with a smartphone, he is required to have monitoring software on that phone. That means that we can see what pictures he takes on his phone. We can block certain internet websites. We can see who he calls, who he texts. Pretty much anything we want to know about his phone, we can see it. We can also tell with that monitoring software if he's actually using the phone or if he's using a different device and not that phone. Mr. Ivano does have a stable support system put into place. He has activated it and used it when he needed to. He's asked for help when he started to struggle. He's reached out. So there's that. He does have, there's things in treatment called safety plans, which I'm not going to get into because that'll confuse you too. But he has to make arrangements to go around certain ways so there's not to go by like a school or a park or whatever issues it might be. So he does have safety plans in order to get around the city in Golden and get to certain areas. Mr. Ivano is not allowed in schools. Mr. Ivano is not allowed in bars or anywhere that the primary purpose is to sell alcohol. So he can't go to liquor stores, bars, things of those natures. Mr. Ivano does receive earn time, so when he is compliant, he is able to get time off his sentence. He is eligible for 10 days a month. So if he does well, say for the month of December, he could possibly earn 10 days off the end of his sentence. He is not up for early discharge, so he will do his time that he's supposed to do and won't be able to do like half the sentence or anything like that. He'll have to do the full extent, which includes the earn time. And I believe that's about all that really I can give information about Mr. Ivano. I hope that answers the several questions that you might have.
I can discuss what's involved with the sex offenders registration in the city of Golden. He's required for the rest of his life to register every 3 months wherever he lives. If he changes residences, he has to let that agency in that city know within 5 days of moving to that place, so that we know where he is all the time. The registration is a standard registration. The forms look the same in every agency in the state of Colorado. There's a lot of personal information about it, including email addresses, telephone numbers, next of kin, places of employment, telephone numbers for the place of employment, all the information that what vehicle he drives. If he drives a different vehicle, he has to immediately let us know what that vehicle is so that we have all the identifying information about it. So we get as much information as we can about him, and we make sure that that remains current, and that's what I do. His residence has to be verified quarterly. That means a uniformed officer will go to his house, the house he told us he's living at, and verify that he's indeed there.
So sexually violent predators don't represent all dangerous sex offenders. And as a matter of fact, somebody who is a sexually violent predator who is under supervision and in treatment are highly monitored. Treatment talks to the parole officer oftentimes daily. So we know a lot about what this offender is doing. Offenders who have not been caught or who are not on supervision are likely to be more dangerous than the SVP who is being highly monitored. So what can you tell your children about the SVP? Avoid scary details. Use language that is honest and age appropriate. Teach your children not to visit the offender's home or yard, but also not to harass them. Teach your children to tell a safe adult if anyone acts inappropriately towards them, i.e. is creepy, too friendly, threatening, not respecting their boundaries, etc. Pay attention to your child's thoughts and feelings. Avoid high-risk situations. Engage in appropriate relationships. Be observant of your surroundings. Teach appropriate social behaviors with your children. Teach correct names for body parts. A lot of times people tell their children they have pet names for body parts, and that is not helpful when if there has been an assault. I mean, start early using correct anatomical names for body parts. Teach your children that adults are not always right. And lastly, teach the importance of honesty and the dangerousness of keeping secrets. The offender's behavior happened in secrecy, and that's why we really stress not engaging in secret-keeping behavior.
So as you all leave here tonight, you'll notice some tables that are set up outside the auditorium. There will be victim advocates at those tables if any of you need to talk to somebody, but there will also be resources on the table for you to take home with you. And those resources include different websites you can go to get information about community protection and how to keep yourselves and your families safe.
Okay, folks, that's going to be Okay, that's the end of the presentation. The last thing we want to leave you with before we go to anybody who may have questions is, you've heard twice tonight, and this will be the third time, that Mr. Avano has a right to live in the community by law. So we want to avoid any behavior that's going to get anybody in trouble for harassing him, physically assaulting him, damaging his personal property. Those things can be illegal, and they will be investigated by the police department, and we would have no choice but to charge any individuals that are caught up in that. So we ask you respectfully to, under difficult circumstances, to not rely on vigilante-type behavior. Use the best course of action if you happen to run into Mr. Avano, to turn and go a different direction, and allow him to exist and continue to go through his therapy and report to parole, etc. So that's the end of the presentation. I hope we've provided you with a significant amount of information that we feel helps arm you about the situation. We do have about 40 minutes left for questions. Is there anybody that's written down a question that would like that addressed by the panel?
And while we're collecting those, be aware that any questions that we don't answer today that occur to you at a later time, you can email me. That's my email address. I'll collect those questions and make sure that they're distributed to the people who can best answer them. You should get a timely response on that. There's also handouts outside at those tables that give a description, like you saw on the slide, of Mr. Avano, and some of those resources that you saw, electronic resources that are available to you.
So Chris and I are going to be going through the questions and identifying which person on the panel we think is the best to answer the question. So I'll be handing the question over to that person. They will read the question out loud so everybody hears what it is, and provide the answer. This first question is for Marissa.
The question is he allowed on the trails, bike paths, and when is he at work? I'm not sure all the exclusion zones that Mr. Ivano has been told by Officer Bruner. Officer Bruner is his parole officer. I'm fairly certain that he's not allowed to go there, unless there's a, bike path or something like that he takes to work, that would be a direct route. But it's not going to be like a bike path where, like up in the mountains or a trail, stuff like that. But it's like a bike path in town. I hope that makes sense what I'm trying to say. But like a bike path, like if it's a trail that goes from, and I'm sorry, I don't know Golden that well, but say the front of this building to the end of the sidewalk, that's gonna be in town, a path, then yes, he's allowed. But it's gonna be a tour up the mountains, no. I'm not sure of Mr. Ivano's work schedule. I'm assuming that he works a normal day like most of us. He could work graveyards, he could work day shift, I'm not exactly sure. And I believe his work schedule does change, so he might do a variety of that. Okay.
I have, I'm sorry. Marissa.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
I got a pile, so go ahead.
Yeah, so have I, so we'll get to all of them.
Okay, well, I'll go this one and then you can go.
Okay.
The next question is he living alone? Has a family or an individual sponsored him? If so, who are they? And how does he pay high rent? Mr. Ivano is living with family members. He was living in Arvada with family members and is now living in Golden with family members as well. So he contributes to the rent. He is not responsible for the rent alone, but he does contribute to the bills and the rent in the house.
Question I had is, if the person moves away, do we get a notification? The reason we asked you to sign up outside was not to know who you are, that's your privacy, but we would like to be able to notify you if he leaves the area, as Arvada did when he left, by using the information you gave us, and we'll email you with any change in his status or any change in his appearance. So please, if you haven't given us that information, if you would, we'll make sure that's available to you.
The next question is, where does he work, or does he have restrictions about where he can work? Mr. Ivano does have a job. I'm not exactly sure where it is or what the title of the company is, but he does have restrictions on work. For example, he is not allowed to obviously work at a bar or something like that where the main purpose is the sale of alcohol. He's also not allowed to work at places where the primary purpose is for children, like Chuck E. Cheese. I'm just kind of give vague examples to kind of make a little more sense. So he does have restrictions on that stuff. He's not allowed to work with people's identity. So he wouldn't be allowed to work as like a sales rep person where they have to call and get your credit card information, birth date, social security numbers. He's not allowed to do any of that stuff. Just kind of examples. It's kind of person by person. He's not allowed to go to people's residences. If say if he is doing construction, he's not allowed to go to residences where people live. He could do construction on the house, but it has to be a house that nobody is occupied in. Or he has to do construction on buildings that nobody is, like it's an office building, so during business hours.
We have some other questions here for the therapist as well, but let me address these. Has Mr. Ivano ever resided in the city of Golden prior to now? And does he have children of his own? He did reside here. He was living here when he committed the crime. That crime occurred in Golden, and he has children that don't live with him now.
This question was already asked and answered. Does he have a job? What hours does he work? And the next question is, how can he live so close to a school? Part of the struggles that we have with sex offenders on parole and sex offenders in general is that sometimes it's really hard to place offenders to get somewhere that's not next to a school or not next to a park or not next to a path, or it's nearly impossible to try to find somewhere that's far away out in the sticks. So we have to look at each person's individual cases, and since Mr. Ivano's offenses are not against any children, that is why he's allowed to live by, it's not next to a school. So I hope everybody knows that. But it is in the vicinity of a school. But we try to limit depending on what the person's behaviors are with parole. And I don't know if there's any restrictions in Golden or not.
Golden has no laws about where sex offenders can live. They're welcome to live any place that anybody else does in this city. There are no restrictions about proximity to schools, parks, et cetera.
So that meaning, for example, if he wasn't on parole, he could live right next door to a school or right across the street from a school.
Okay, I have two questions, and they're sort of similar, so I'm going to answer them at the same time. And the first question, Mr. Ivano's crime took place in Golden per your presentation. Now he has returned to Golden. Does this return act as a trigger that can increase his likelihood of reoffense beyond what you would expect by virtue of his designation as an SVP? The second question is notice stated high likelihood to reoffend. Can you explain why you believe that to be the case? So in the first question, it does not necessarily act as a trigger. Because he is highly monitored, we know what he's doing, and he is engaged in treatment. If he were to not engage in treatment, that would be a trigger for him, which would then likely trigger parole, a response from parole. What we do know is that sex offenders who are stable, who have good family support, are likely to benefit from treatment. They learn appropriate social skills, they mitigate their deviant sexual arousal. So there's lots of things that they can do in treatment to lower their risk. High risk to reoffend, he may always be labeled as high risk to reoffend just based on the risk assessments. And those risk assessments often are based on static dynamics, such as the age he was when he committed the offense, how many prior offenses he committed, was he employed at the time of offense. So there's a lot of things that play into those static risk factors. However, if he is engaged in treatment, if he's working the program, he can do things that will mitigate that risk and hopefully decrease his risk as he's learning tools to engage in appropriate behaviors. So hopefully that answered the questions.
I see that Christian has a whole pile there, so let me address the last question I have, and then I'll be quiet. More specifically, where in Golden did this behavior occur, at what time of day? It occurred in the central part of the city, in the business area, and it occurred at night. Our employees advised when an SVP seeks employment. That's up to the employer, but understand there are restrictions that could be interpreted as harassment or interference with a person's ability to have employment. But that notification to fellow employees is up to the employer, not to us.
There was a question about the age of his victim. As Detective Barron indicated, we're happy to answer questions generally to help you protect yourself, but we also want to make sure that we protect the victim. My office prosecuted Mr. Ivano for this sex assault and are aware of the victim and engaged with her and offered services to her. It was a young adult female. It was not a child. He has not had a child victim in his history. His two prior offenses, the misdemeanor offenses out of the state of Arizona, were also not child victims. This was a young adult female in this case. What were the circumstances of the attack so that I can protect myself, and should I be concerned about walking by myself? I'll address those separately. Generally, the circumstances were Mr. Ivano followed somebody, offered assistance to walk them home, and in the course of that, sexually assaulted that young adult female. Should I be concerned about walking by myself? That is a personal decision that I think you always want to be cognizant of your surroundings. You always want to make sure that you're protecting yourself and engaging in safe behavior. As it relates to Mr. Ivano, as we've talked about, the benefit to this community as it relates to Mr. Ivano is he will spend at a minimum the next year under parole supervision, under the very able and close supervision of the Colorado Division of Adult Parole. As it relates to Mr. Ivano, you need to protect yourself, you need to be aware of where he lives, but more importantly, and the reason we spent over half this presentation talking to you generally about sex offenses and sex offenders, is you need to be concerned about people beyond Mr. Ivano. You need to be concerned that most of the offenses are committed by somebody that has never been convicted and has never been caught. And so the question about, should somebody walk alone by themselves, I think you need to take caution about times of day, about lighting, about being in public areas where you can protect yourself and be cognizant of those public safety factors as you normally, I think, would and should do. And then the last question is, why was he given a light prison sentence and as well as such light parole time, and then also why not lifetime parole? Those are great questions in terms of why was he given such a light prison sentence. He was convicted of a Class 5 felony. That Class 5 felony has a sentencing range of 1 to 3 years in the Department of Corrections. He was given a midpoint sentence. He was given a 2-year sentence in the Department of Corrections and paroled out. And similar in terms of that sentencing standard, a Class 5 felony carries with it a mandatory period of 2 years of parole. The judge doesn't have discretion about the parole time. The parole time is set based on the nature of the offense and the felony classification. So he's doing the full 2 years parole that he gets because he was convicted of a Class 5 felony. And he did a 2-year sentence out of a possible range of 1 to 3 years because of the convicted offense for which he received. That offense that he pled guilty to and was convicted of was not a lifetime sex offense. There are lifetime sex offenses in the state of Colorado. A Class 5 felony attempted sexual assault is not one of those. So he was not subject to lifetime probation, was not subject to lifetime prison, and therefore also not subject to lifetime parole as well.
Do you guys have anything over there? I do. This kind of goes along with one of the questions that Christian's had. Does he have a car, or will he be walking everywhere? As far as I know right now, Mr. Ivano does not have a car, and he probably will not get permission to drive. But I could be completely wrong on that, just by looking at what I just kind of glanced at in here. So he probably will more than likely be walking and taking the bus. And just along with that too, he also has to have permission to drive. If and when that does happen, he's required to give us all the registration, vehicle, VIN number, all that stuff. And he's also required to register that with the city, so the city is also aware of that information. The next question is, what are some of the stats of someone off parole? Are they likely to reoffend when they're no longer monitored? I don't have an answer to that. I don't know. Do you know?
I do.
Okay, great.
What we know about sex offenders is the longer the period of time they are out of Department of Corrections and longer period of time they have gone in the community offense-free, the less risk they pose. The highest risk sex offenders and highest risk sexually violent predators are those that are within their first year in the community. Mr. Ivano is now just outside of 1 year or right around 1 year in the community, but he is actively under intensive parole supervision. That is a benefit. Unfortunately, I've been in the unenviable task of being in front of a group like you with somebody that gets out of the Department of Corrections and has zero supervision. That is not Mr. Ivano, and I think for the benefit of the city of Golden, he will spend 2 years in the community under intense supervision, and we know with that, by the time he's off that supervision, he will be at a lower risk to reoffend. Now, that's not to give you undue solace. You still need to protect yourself and your community and your family, but that is to say, based on the research that we know for sex offenders, it is that first year in the community, and he is very close to that 1 year, and he is under tight and very close monitoring in the community.
Is there any final questions? Anybody have any final questions they've written down that they'd like us to read? We have one more coming up here. You have a question?
Yeah, I can't write very good, so you wouldn't have been able to understand it anyway. So there's an app for everything, and you guys are tracking this guy. I have 2 young girls and a couple close relatives in town as well. You guys have something that I could put on their phone so they know where the guy is at, so they can avoid his location? Or is there something one of the departments offers to share tracking? Not out of harassment, just, hey, girls, you want to walk downtown? Well, here's something you can look at.
The Department of Parole and the parole officers have access to the GPS system, and they have real-time information about where Mr. Ivano is. We at the police department do not have that. They would notify us if we needed to know, but we don't have that minute-by-minute information. So to answer you, we do not have that kind of application available here.
Okay. Piggyback off of that. I think right now, though, it is a really good opportunity for you to talk to your girls about just safety and self-awareness and, even like going in numbers. I mean, making sure that they've got somebody who knows where they're going and where they're going to be and when they'll show up and when they're expected back. Communication can never be a bad thing. So even though you're not going to have the opportunity to know exactly where this offender is at all times, you certainly can still take your own steps to make sure that your girls are safe.
Yeah, well, we do that. I'm just looking for another tool, maybe just, it's just comfort, not anything else, right?
Yeah.
So this question, has Mr. Ivano been involved in therapy, sex offender therapy prior to this latest offense in Colorado, Arizona, or any other state? It's my understanding that his 2 prior offenses were misdemeanor offenses out of Arizona. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Arizona. And so it is, I don't know if he participated in therapy at that time. He probably did not, so this is probably his first time in treatment. But I don't know for sure.
Another question that came in, I'll address, says 3 days ago his address was listed at 400 Illinois Street. Is he at Maple Street or Illinois Street? He's living on Maple Street in the 500 block. Okay, any final questions? Okay, if you'll,
What is the radius of the area of notification?
I can tell you that. The chief of police in Golden decides what area will notify. That area was from the north side of 10th Street to Ford around to the intersection of Washington and Highway 93, across the highway to the large residential area on the west side of 93, and then back. So it was a polygon roughly surrounding his residence.
I will
There were
also
a
tell
total
you,
of 2,900 homes notified.
we also notified the Colorado School of Mines staff, and they put out some flyers and stuff notifying about the meeting. Final questions?
He does not right now, but he is employed.
You'll see Detective Barron's email address up here. Please write that down. If you think of questions tonight, we will track all of those questions. We'll get it to the right expert on the panel, and they will email you a response back, okay? This is a tough topic. We're not going to stand here and pretend that everybody's going to walk out of here feeling good about tonight. That's not what the circumstances surrounding this presentation were about. We want you to know that we feel and respect how you guys are dealing with this in terms of having somebody of this nature living in your neighborhood. The Golden Police Department, when this event happened, had this individual in custody within about 2 hours. We have very good police officers. We have an exceptional parole department that is monitoring very closely. He's being given therapy. He's monitored. We are aware of who he is and where he is. Our officers are aware of that. We will not harass him, but we will monitor closely every opportunity we can to make sure that we can reduce any potential issues. I wish I could give you absolute, concrete assurances, but I think you know that I cannot. What I can tell you is you got a fine police department. You have a city that's very transparent. We have council members here today. We've brought a number of experts to help show you that this is a group initiative and that we are doing everything within our control to make your community and where you live, and where you work, where you play, and where you shop safe. So we hope the information tonight was valuable. I hope that you go home feeling that your police department is fully supporting you. And again, would encourage you with any questions, please send those to Detective Barron. We'll get that information back to you. I'm going to ask our guests to exit the room first so that they can go out front. I know some of you may not have wanted to ask a question. I want them to be available if you want to speak to them one-on-one. If we'll respect people's time, we'll try to keep that to about 15 or 20 minutes, but we want to have that opportunity for you. So thank you again, everybody, for coming tonight, and appreciate it. Travel home safely.
And again, I'll remind you that the information about this person is at the tables outside. You can pick up a flyer about that now.